Today we are talking about the analyst and the artist, a tale of two superpowers.
Creativity without structure is just chaos.
The reason why structure exists from an analytical perspective is that it's persistent. 1 + 1 is always 2 in these situations. And from there isn't really anywhere to go. But if you find a creative way to get somewhere else, you need to unlock that and find someplace else, right? You need to get that from someplace else. You need inspiration from someplace else. So creative inspiration, creative energy has to come from someplace else.
In order for you to be able to really expand your potential as an artist, you have to have the structure in place. The more definitive it is, the more you're able to expand your creativity.
Innovations in the future don't come from textbooks, right? They come from someplace else. And that someplace else is unknown. Welcome to Emergence Now. This is a bit of a bittersweet moment because this is our last episode live and in Chicago. Dhiren, how do you feel about that?
I'm really enjoying these in-person live.
Makes a difference, right?
Absolutely. I mean, feeling the energy in the room.
Yeah. There's just Zoom calls in Riverside, as good as tools as they are, just like we're just in flow right now. Like you notice how absolutely effortless the conversation was, no tech issues, and we were just like in the pocket. It felt like almost like right away.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? And time's just flying.
Yeah. I feel like I could do this like all night. Crazy. All right, one of us should consider moving. I don't know who. All right, everybody. Today we are talking about the analyst and the artist, a tale of two superpowers. Now, what does that mean? So the premise of this is really based on what I've been thinking about these really crafty skill sets. I know a lot of people that fall into one of two buckets, and I don't like to do kind of these harsh categorizations where I have these rigid frameworks and just attribute, somebody in saying, you know what, you're very left brain or you're very right brain. You're really, really creative or you're really, really analytical. But it's good to just have a conversation to understand the nuances in between these two spectrums, right? So the analyst is obviously like an engineer or a physicist like an Oppenheimer or an Albert Einstein that can quantify things and they get to genius levels and unlock potential, but it starts with a very rigorous framework. 1 + 1 is always 2. But the artist, on the other hand, it feels like they're operating from somewhere else. They're operating from kind of this realm of imagination and being able to be in the moment and creating things by creating space and by accessing things and putting different things into different places and then combining them to create something new. And that's ultimately where innovation comes from. So I'd like to tee up this conversation by really looking at, the distinction between left brain and right brain dominance, and then kind of maybe debunking different myths around this, and then looking at the strengths and the attributes of each. So with that in mind, when you take a look at the characteristics of left brain dominant individuals, you have a lot of power in data, logic, analytical thinking. And then, from there, you could be creative too. Creativity comes from a lot of different places. But Dhiren, do you feel like you are more right brain or left brain? Do you feel like you're more an analyst or do you feel like you're more of an artist? And if you're a combination of both, give me some percentages.
I would say early in my career, I was probably more analytical. I think more recently, in the last few years, I've switched to being more creative. And if I had to put a percentage on it now, I would say 70-30. 70 more creative, 30% more analytical.
You just wrote a book, didn't you? Let's talk about that.
I did. It took me 2 years to write this book. And I would say in the first year, I was very analytical on how I put the book together. And that slowed me down. And that's when I realized that, writing a book is not about being analytical. I can't take an analytical approach to writing a book. I had to really lean into my creative side. And when I made that switch, the book started writing itself. It was more effortless. I started achieving a higher level of flow. And so the question is, do we put ourselves in a situation where we should ask ourselves, based on what I'm working on now, should I be more analytical or more creative? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know what I'm going to say. It's the B word because you always need a component of both. But I'd say when you said you unlocked kind of new realms of possibilities, you may have started with an outline. You may have started with a structure.
Yes.
But, that was an analytical side saying, okay, I have a vision of what this should be.
Yeah.
But then you basically moved into what this could be. So I'm sure it took you in different directions, right? And so having written books myself, I kind of go into that from the very beginning, is just knowing that I don't have all the answers up front, but I let it almost share with me. I'm inviting the asset, the piece, the work, the entity that is what this is going to be grow into whatever it wants to be, right? So that's more accessing something in the moment. So that's what artists do. And ultimately, you can't just quantify something and say, this is what it needs to be, and classify something and put it in a table and say, this is exactly what it needs to be, because that's just not going to get you to a place that's going to create something new, something interesting, right? And granted, engineering has gotten us to a very, very magnificent place when you quantify absolutely everything. Robert Oppenheimer, really, really great scientific mind, created very specific conditions to achieve what he did. Same with any physicist, quantifying these types of things, right? But there is a key distinction there. I would say that I am both, but I am definitely more creative dominant. And the reason for that is because my intuition is stronger than ever. I appreciate holistic thinking, divergent thinking, more fluency in kind of what I'm creating. And then now with all the tools that we have with ChatGPT and AI and all of those things, I feel like it's just supercharged my own creativity. So that's kind of where I'm at. So
what's so interesting is the debate is that it may kill creativity. But what you're saying is that it's actually elevated your creativity.
It's enhanced my creativity. It's unlocked my creativity. For those that feel like, yes, it's commoditizing. We thought that AI would automate the things that are like menial in nature. Well, really, it's harder to automate like being a masseuse or a hairstylist or something like that, right? And what we didn't expect was that AI would start automating these generative creative arts, these graphic images, tools, videos, writing. Now you can write Shakespeare and write a book, especially with Anthropic and Claude and these massive inputs that create these really interesting generative outputs. But what's interesting about that to me is that it enhanced my creativity such that, man, I'm so busy, but now I'm going back to like writing this American mythology novel that I have. It's doing my notes, it's doing my chapter organization, it's doing my character study. It's my writing partner.
So are you outsourcing the analytical side?
I'm outsourcing the blank page problem. I am outsourcing, I'm stuck. I'm sitting here until my head is bleeding and nothing is coming out. I'm going to procrastinate a little bit more. No, I just write a little prompt. And if I can't write like a single paragraph, like obviously the more you give it, the more it comes out. But I've found a flow with ChatGPT such that I could go page by page. Oh, that scene didn't come out the way that I wanted it. Oh no, change it this way. Oh, let's add a little bit of Quentin Tarantino nuance to it, right? So you could be a chef, but now you have like little minions working for you, cranking out like the hard stuff. And you get to think about big picture all the time. So yeah, I would say, thank God for LLMs. They are definitely using the analyst persona in a way that they are quantifying and predicting the next word. But also I am being artistic by kind of thinking much higher level from this, right? So just some examples of, again, we had talked about famous analysts. We got Einstein. We talked about Oppenheimer. Finance guys, Michael Burry, Bobby Axelrod, right? I think of Michael Saylor in this. Do you think Elon is an analyst or an artist?
I think he's both.
Okay.
I think he's both.
But he's an engineer.
He's an engineer, which is why he has an analytical mind.
Yep.
But at the same time, he has this expanded, or ever expanding imagination that is really all about creativity, right? It's all about being able to think of something that doesn't exist. And I think that's why he's so effective, is because he's both. He's able to really lean into both sides of his brain, based on the situation that he's in or what he wants to create. So yeah, I would say both. If you had to put a percentage, or if I had to put a percentage on it, I couldn't tell you. I mean, I'd say 50-50, but nothing's ever 50-50, right?
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I would say it's probably 51-49 creative.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. Okay, switching gears over to famous artists. We got Pablo Picasso, Tom York, my favorite band, Radiohead, and of course, MJ, Michael Jackson. Do you think he had a quantitative bone in him? And I'm going to raise something a little bit controversial about how he operated in the studio, but do you think he was analytical? Obviously, he was mostly artist, but how analytical do you think MJ was?
Good question. He had to have been analytical because he had this side of him that actually created what he created, but at the same time, to be able to create that, like you said, you have to be able to put together, the chapters. You have to be able to put together themes, certain structure around creativity, right? Because creativity without structure is just chaos. And there's genius in that, but in order for him to be able to have created and consistently been creative, there had to have been some structure around his creativity. So I would say a little bit of both. Again, yeah.
It's always both, right?
Yeah, it's always both.
Always both. Well, I heard he was a very rigorous, really difficult person to work with in the studio because everything had to be the exact note, the exact key, the exact modification, the exact composition, everything exact, when the nature of music is not chaos per se, but there's kind of this fluidity to it, right? And Prince operated in the opposite of that kind of cultivated environment. He was just like, okay, if there's a sneeze in there, let's incorporate it, right? And John Cage was the same thing. He was like, he'd do kind of these magnificent operatic kind of orchestras, and if there was a baby crying in the audience, he'd find a way to work the baby in. So that speaks to kind of this, the orchestra and the symphony of life, right? So obviously, we're starting to land the plane on both of these very fastidious skill sets. You need some kind of analytical mind to get the structure, get the rigor in, get the operational efficiency in, especially if you're an entrepreneur. But in order to get to the X factor, in order to get to the thing that nobody else is doing, because I would say the reason why structure exists from an analytical perspective is that it's persistent. You have persistent structures that you could put in tables. 1 + 1 is always 2 in these situations. And from there isn't really anywhere to go. But if you find a creative way to get somewhere else, you need to unlock that and find someplace else, right? You need to get that from someplace else. You need inspiration from someplace else. So creative inspiration, creative energy has to come from someplace else.
Absolutely. Where does it come from?
That's where, tying that back to what we had talked about. Like if you are stillness, like where does your inspiration come from? It's like you're typing one word at a time, you're exploring an idea, but if you're just constantly thinking about that specific challenge or what you want to get out of this chapter, you're going to end up banging your head against the wall. It really needs to come from someplace else. And what I mean by that someplace else is it's found in the ether. It's found in that quantum state where a realm of possibilities could take you in a different direction. And that's really when you start to unlock more of those types of opportunities.
Yeah. What about feedback?
Yeah.
What about a mastermind of sort that gives you feedback? What about collaboration?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a structured way to get feedback the way that you need to from your users, and you need to feed that back into the product depending on what kind of outcome that you want to generate from it. If you want to get more usability, more adoption, people whipping out their credit cards to move beyond the paywall and things like that, then you need to incorporate feedback. But those are, again, you're tied to outcomes now. And then now you can look at tech and say, all right, I want to get to this outcome. Then every business analyst knows that if you're evaluating which piece of your software, which workflow is generating the most kind of adoption, let's just continue to skate toward that puck and then drive more adoption that way, right? So that's rigorous, that's methodological, that is very much coming from a sense of structure, but you can incorporate that in a creative way. But ultimately, I think that's more analyst than it is artist.
Would you say then that in order for you to be able to really expand your capability, your potential as an artist, you have to have the analyst, the analytical, the structure in place, and the more definitive it is, the more you're able to expand your creativity.
You think so? I don't know. I think there's a challenge there because, I mean, look at art schools, for instance, right? You're taught very specific orientations of how you should hold a paintbrush or a pencil. And, oh, this is the style of modernism. Oh, this is the style of post-structuralism. And you're borrowing from templates of the past to get to innovations of the future. But innovations in the future don't come from textbooks, right? They come from someplace else. And that someplace else is unknown. And if it were known, then it would be written in a textbook, right? And so predictable. It would be documented, which is why I would say the more you have access to things that we've talked about in previous episodes in the stillness. And yeah, I'd like you to talk about like how Joe D finds, again, that sense of genius. Like you'd say, obviously he's creative, but he's a doctor. There's some rigor around that. He's running a business. He's an analyst, but a lot of his creativity indeed comes from someplace else. What do you think about that someplace else?
So let's talk about the process of getting to that someplace else. So from what I understand, and we were talking about this over lunch, is that when I look at people who have created, enormous innovation, where they've been able to create something that has not existed, right? When I read about these people, it's very clear to me that they got these downloads, these epiphanies from moments of solitude, moments of silence, moments of being deep in, within themselves. And which we talked about, which is the quantum space where infinite possibilities exist, right? And so in terms of that process, it's sitting in that space, right? When I think about my book, just going back to the example that I gave earlier, when I was going through that process, I found that when I was sitting in solitude, I was getting these ideas. I don't know where it was coming from, right? It wasn't coming from my external environment. It was coming from that quantum space. It was coming from that space where infinite possibilities exist. And all of a sudden I would come out and I would have a chapter that would just write itself.
Effortless.
It was completely effortlessly. Yeah. And as I, discovered and gotten closer to Dr. Joe, and once, as I understand the journey that, a lot of the creativity that comes from a lot of these tech entrepreneurs and spiritual gurus and, business tycoons, I've realized that a lot of that is not coming from the external environment. It's coming from within. It's coming from that artist, the imagination that is boundless.
Yeah. But can't quantifiable, very rigorous ideas that the analyst has also come from somewhere within? Wouldn't equals MC squared kind of come from within in some way, right? Like Einstein probably was diligent at work for years, kind of creating the space for that. But I would argue that that also kind of came from someplace else. Was there some creativity in that?
Yeah, I think that was all creativity.
Right. So it's just so convoluted. It's not like black or white, obviously.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. And it's, again, it goes to being able to really live in both realms.
Yeah.
Hey there. We're taking a quick break from the show to let you know that if you'd like to invite Dhiren or Nikos to speak at your next event on topics ranging from emergence and the inner game to the future of AI, we've got you covered. Simply email us at info@emergencenowpod.com. Once again, that's info@emergencenowpod.com. Now, let's dive back to the show.
So there's the nature versus nurture component to it, because I definitely feel like I started off like you, definitely analytical, even though I had a at least in my business career, because that's the problem with the business career is that you're taught, like you go to business school and you went to B school, but everything comes from a textbook, a case study, and a way that you operate, principled practices, Six Sigma, all of those things, a way to do go-to-market, a way to do a business plan, structure, rigors, all kinds of principled practices, blueprints for everything. Yet the most interesting things come from completely away from that, which is super interesting. How much of that was nature? How much of that was nurture?
The perennial question, nurture versus nature.
Yeah.
I'm in that space now where I feel everything is nurture.
Okay. So we started the conversation, or at least in a previous episode, about the blank slate. And you're saying now that everything is nurture because you're taught things. Or you learn things.
Or we learn things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when we learn things that limit us, we can unlearn it. You spoke about unlearning, right? We can unlearn it to make space for something that is more empowering, more creative, more innovative.
Yeah.
So taking the example of what we're talking about versus, the analyst versus the artist, when we are able to unlearn old ways of doing, old ways of writing code or going to market or a business model, we're able to then incrementally add a different new perspective or a new way of doing it. And now it's something completely different.
Yeah.
Right. And that's all nurture because we've unlearned a part of what has been conditioned and programmed into us through B school or mentors or our environment, collective environment. And now we're able to create something completely new.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What do you think the future holds for both analysts and artists? So you said that a lot of this can be commoditized in a previous episode in terms of creative output, but analytical output can also be commoditized at the same time. I mean, it started with calculators and then it evolved into machines and building kind of these rigors into systems and societies and frameworks and industries. So what does the future hold for somebody that's a little bit more analytical versus somebody that is artistic? And if you absolutely had to place your bet on something and building that craft and skill set, if you're forced to choose, you can't say both. What would you want to place your bet on? Or who? The type of archetype, analyst or artist, to win. If the goal was to win, we got to define winning, right? What does winning mean? Like
getting what you want, let's say.
Getting what you want. Okay.
Yeah. Is it getting what you want or is it being happy?
Ah, okay. Yeah. Right. Right. It's interesting too, because you can't help but converge the two. One of my previous partners that I worked with, he was one of the co-founders of IBM Watson, and he was into natural language processing before it became kind of all the buzz. And he said that the best data scientists that did NLP were actually classical musicians because of the way that they could move in and out of different vector spaces. And again, vector spaces are just kind of representations of how words co-occur with one another, such that when you're pushing, massive amounts of text into these vector space models, it's associating things with how often is, the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy blank. How often do you see that statement? Is it cat? Is it dog? Is it elephant? And then it would just contextually start to map that. When you're an NLP linguistic extractor or data scientist, then you somehow are better at implementing the code that is able to use machine learning to get to these models a whole lot faster and input these data sets a whole lot faster. So you can't get away from it. Like there's just analytical thinking and creativity and unlocking all of those things just have to go hand in hand. You just can't separate the two.
But do you think that machines are going to be able to do the analytical part better than we will be able to?
I would say anything that a human can do today, and there is a computer involved, then AI would be able to do it better already.
Okay, so not just the analytical part, but also
All
the creativity.
I mean, we're already seeing it today, right?
Yeah.
We're already seeing it with generative arts and AI, generative AI.
So then why does it matter?
Why does it matter what you place your bet on?
Yeah.
I think where we're starting to lean toward is, obviously we want to stay optimistic with everything, but we want to embrace change. We want to embrace these tools. We want to be both analytical and we want to be creative at the same time, right? Do you agree with that or no?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why it's important to still place the bet is because who's programming the machines?
Yes. And I think this goes back to what you had mentioned earlier, is there needs to be a level of nuance where the machines can be smarter, not in the traditional way where it's only driving toward those specific outcomes, but understanding kind of the core aspect of humanity, being more empathetic, being more resilient, being more humble, and understanding what the human really needs. And that's how we can get to this alignment problem, or solving for the alignment problem between humans and machines, and achieving true symbiosis.
Beautiful. So to answer your question, I would go with the creativity. Yeah.
Always with
the artist.
I think it's just more fun to be an artist.
Yeah.
I as much as I wanted to, and I tried coding numerous times in my life, never got past, like a 101 level in Python.
Yeah. Hello world.
No, well, a little beyond hello world. I created a thermometer and an automated thermometer that translated Celsius to Fahrenheit. Thank you. and a few more things now.
Hello thermometer.
Hello thermometer. But beyond that, I knew enough to be dangerous, and I had a lot of people to code on my behalf, right? So I was the prompt engineer to two engineers. All you needed to create was your PRD MRD.
Yeah, absolutely.
here's my product development doc, and then you go from there. So yeah, I agree that creativity is definitely the way to go. Being an artist is the way to go, because it's just more fun and it's cooler.
And so you would place your bet on the artist?
I would. Yeah, always the artist, just because there's a way that artists can move people that in a way that artists can move people that engineers can't, right? Just like that inspo, that feeling. And I think that's going to continue to shape the world, is that passion, that feeling, all of the X factors that we've been talking about over this Chicago series. Let's call it the Chicago series. Man, I'm gonna miss doing this in person, bro.
Yeah.
Like we got to do this. We got to do this at least like once, a couple times a year. Can we do this a couple times a year?
I think we can definitely do it once a year.
Yeah,
beyond a doubt.
Right,
with no doubt. Twice a year, I think we can definitely manage.
Yeah.
For
sure. So, all right. So landing the plane, self-awareness is definitely the first step in understanding kind of who you are. What's your dominant side? If you're a natural at math, be a natural at math. There will be plenty of opportunities for you. Embrace both sides for holistic growth. When it's natural to lean on one side, cultivate your skills on the other, so that you can kind of have that well-balanced point of view and always that well-balanced perspective on both sides of the equation. And then collaboration. Obviously, surround yourself with diverse thinkers. We talked about growth a lot, cultivating the right kind of environment, collaborating with those who possess any complementary skills, and then obviously continuing to educate yourself with the tools that are available today. What else you got, Dhiren? Any closing thoughts on this wonderful Chicago series live and in effect. What else you got?
Yeah, I would definitely say the artist, without a doubt.
Yeah.
As someone who has gone through that journey
Sure.
of creating something from nothing, being analytical and getting to that point where, and I felt like I was actually coming up against the ceiling.
Totally.
And to be able to break through the ceiling, I had to be more creative. And as you said earlier, in the environment that we're moving into or that we're already in, wherein intelligence, definitive intelligence, or a whole spectrum of intelligence is going to be commoditized, to be able to work with machines and to be able to, think of new possibilities, that really comes from the right brain.
Yeah.
Right? It's all creative thinking. And when I speak to my kids and I talk about intelligence, it's no longer what it used to be, right? It's all about, thinking of new ways of solving a problem, right? New ways of, looking at a problem firstly, right? And then solving it. And so definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, I would place my bet on the artist.
Right.
Final thoughts. Well, this was something that we need to do much more often.
Yeah, totally.
The in-person is definitely something that I've really enjoyed. And so, we've got to make sure that it happens more often.
All right, brother. Well, 25 years in the making. We are sending you off in style. Love you to death, my man. And safe
Love
travels.
you too.
Safe travels and namaste. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Catch you in the next episode.
Thank you for tuning in to Emergence Now, where we explore the emerging trends, technologies, and ideas that are shaping our world today for you to discover yourself. We hope you enjoyed this episode and gained valuable insights that you can apply in your own life. If you want to stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And don't forget to follow us on social media, where we share additional content, engage with our community, and keep the conversation going. Thanks again for listening to Emergence Now, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode.